All right. Listen, I didn't want to go into this. I didn't want to go into reading Save the Cat Writes a Novel in this completely negative headspace. I really didn't. I don't like being that guy. I don't want to be that guy who's like, I'm going to hate read this thing and then I'm going to. I never do that. Like, I don't start reading a book because I know I'm going to hate it and so that I can do some kind of like negative review or takedown video or something crazy like that. And so, but it was something I kept hearing about. I've seen a bunch of this stuff online. But, when you see like out of context pieces of things on the internet and then make a judgment about that, you're part of the problem, right? I mean, I think please say we can all agree on that at least, right? So, I'm feeling all this kind of like, I don't know about this. I don't like the way this is sounding. But then I'm seeing people talking about it and, like really positive reviews, places like Goodreads and so on. Like, this has really helped me and, this has really kickstarted me to be able to sort of write my first novel, all this kind of great stuff, which is what I love to hear. And I read books on the art and craft of writing fiction, especially science fiction, fantasy, horror, my, sort of, main genres. I was going to say all the time, but not literally all the time, but often, right? I read those books a lot, and obviously not. Please believe me, right? And I think if you have been following along on my blog, you've seen maybe one or two of those that I've read and said like, oh no. Recently, one that just completely dismissed all genre fiction and genre fiction authors as non-artists, which where you can go with that, right? So, but most of the time it's, I read this and here's all the great stuff I got out of it, right? These are the notes that I took. This is, I absolutely agree with this. This was an interesting idea that I never thought of. I'm always looking to be better, right? To be smarter, to be a better editor. This, I've been doing this for a long time, but I also really sincerely don't want to be the old guy who's like, oh, back in my day, we had it all figured out. And, whenever my day was, we didn't have anything figured out. Trust me, if we had it figured out, we wouldn't be where we are in the world today, right? Like, whatever. So for me, it's always, I would rather always be learning. There's always new ideas. There's always new approaches. There's new people coming in. The writing landscape, especially the genre or, the fantasy and science fiction in particular landscapes are getting way more diverse than they used to be. And that's really exciting. Lots of new ideas out there, new styles, new combinations of genres and so on. And I'm just 100% in on all of that. I really am. And so I'm always reading books on sort of the state of the genre and the art and craft of writing because I'm learning all the time, right? All the time. And I think everybody should be learning all the time. You're never too old, right? So hearing all about Save the Cat, I have a natural tendency to sort of cringe at formula stuff. But then at the same time, we'll talk about how I have actually sort of brought in formulas and sort of used versions of formulas. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between formula and recipe, which they get into in Save the Cat. So, it felt like something that I have to read, right? And I was just curious to see, okay, so, I get that it's kind of, following the hero's journey thing. Again, we'll get into that in more detail, but is it an improvement on that? I don't know, right? So I really didn't go into this thinking, I'm just going to wail on this book. It's going to be terrible. And during the reading of it, I had to stop and breathe and and remind myself of that and say okay, nobody's 100% correct, right? So if there's something in there, if there's an assertion that just, you're kind of like, no, right? What? okay, then that's one idea. The next idea may be like, ooh, okay, there's something I never thought of. So I'm trying to, as I'm reading it, I don't have a copy of it. You'll see it kind of placed here at certain points, but, and there'll be slides and so on. But I checked it out of the library, which is obviously perfectly fine to do. Don't, I say this over and over again, and not just in the book haul videos. Don't sleep on your library. Go to your library, right? Make use of that resource. So I'm going in thinking, find the positive. I'm stopping myself while I'm reading it and saying, okay, refocus on what's in here that's good. But listen, everybody, I mean, in the end, I can't. I can't with this. I didn't mean to smile. So if you're out there and you're like, right, yeah, Save the Cat, man, that's like the Bible, right? I've been using that, and this is like the book that I refer to, and I keep seeing this out there, right? That people are saying, oh my God, this is the greatest thing. Or anyway, this is really useful and this has really helped me, which is terrific, generally speaking, right? So let me ask you if I can, for you, like pro Save the Cat people, to try to come into this the same way I tried to go into reading the book, you know, thinking, okay, it sounds like this guy is not happy. But maybe there's something, maybe he's got something to add to this, right? Because I think when we get into whoever that is, and certainly me included in this, yeah, I hate this, I'm for this, I'm against that, and then we just sort of become, you know, encamped in those things, and we don't talk to each other except you're dumb because you like the thing or the thing you do. I just don't want to live in that world. It's always constantly foaming around me, but I don't want to live in it. So try to be, if you're pro Save the Cat, you know, as open to my anti-Save the Cat, I mean, spoiler alert, as I was trying to be going into reading it, and kept trying to remind myself as I'm reading it to be. Okay, so again, going back to the sort of, oh, Phil's the old guy who, you know, thinks he's an expert because he's been doing it for a long time. Well, I mean, what is an expert? But at the same time, like I said, I'm always reading books about writing. I'm always trying to learn. I'm all over the internet, always engaging with, right? My social media is 99.9% talking about writing and about genre fiction writing, about fantasy and science fiction and horror. And then like whatever fraction of percent is usually about dogs. You know, I like dogs, and I like role-playing games and stuff. But you're not going to really see me out there like in the political day-to-day news stuff ever. But so I'm not coming into this like, hey, this new idea is done because it's new, and only people with gray in their beard or white, you know, like in their beard, know the score, and all you dumb kids are dumb. It's just not how I think. It's not how I operate. Okay? So I have been doing this for a long time, right? I mean, I started really editing professionally in 1986, right around the time that I started writing. And during those early years, I had day jobs and stuff, but I was always there and I was always in this. And then really started doing it for a living in 95 and never looked back. This is what I have been doing for a living, right? Editing, writing, teaching on the art and craft of fiction, fantasy, and science fiction in particular. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, where when I say looking at this book, that no matter what it says, no matter how it's presented, right? No matter how the terminology has changed, whether it's called a formula or We're making up a new definition for the word genre. During all of that time that I worked with hundreds of authors, and I mean literally hundreds of authors, at very different, widely divergent points in their careers, from I just sat down and I wrote my first novel and I have no idea anything, help me say that this is even in English, I'm looking at it and I don't even know, right? To authors who are already on the bestseller list before I got, sort of tagged in. And everyone in between, right? So during that time, in all of that time, and in all of the reading that I have done about the art and craft of writing, interviews with authors that I have conducted and that I have read, spanning throughout, right? And again, if you've been following along on my blog for all these years, I'm a big fan of Paris Review interviews. Like, I'm always quoting Paris Review interviews. So I'm reading that kind of stuff all the time. Never in that time, okay, creeping up on 40 years, have I ever detected the slightest bit of evidence that this Save the Cat formula, right, the beat sheet as it's presented, is not just the best way to structure a novel, but the only way to structure a novel. I have never, ever seen that actually in action. So how do we explain any of this, right? But I think I'm getting ahead of myself, right? So let's walk through this book. I was making notes along the way, right? I was taking pictures. Love the technology now, right? Because it's a library book, I can't write in it. Just took a picture with my phone and then would be able to copy the text out. So I have actually taken certain parts of the text out and really made notes as I was going along. And again, trying really hard to remind myself, don't just hate this, right? What's good in here? So most of what we're going to talk about are really based on those notes that I was taking as we went along. So then very close to the beginning, a bunch of stuff honestly really gave me pause, right? I'm breathing, right? So this is kind of like right away, right? In the introduction. So right away, I'm already kind of like on guard from this when the author said, did Blake Snyder invent something that no one ever had before? Not at all. He simply studied the elements of story and character transformation and noticed an underlying pattern, a secret storytelling code. So now Blake Snyder is the author of the original Save the Cat, which was for screenwriters. And this one sort of follows, Save the Cat writes a novel sort of follows from that, right? Was written by Jessica Brody. So did Blake Snyder, the screenwriter who wrote the original book, invent something that no one ever had before? Well, that's for sure no, right? And she says that, Jessica Brody at least says that right up front, not at all. He simply studied the elements of story and character transformation and noticed an underlying pattern. A secret storytelling code. Okay, so in fact, there's nothing secret about this. And the admission of that right up front contradicts the assertion at the end of that one paragraph, right? Did he invent something new? Yes, he did, sort of, right? And right there, that's a little bit off-putting. But again, this is an author trying to say, hey man, there's a reason to read this book. Let's go. I've got something that's going to help you. So right there, I'm kind of, again, sort of pulling back and saying, okay, right? I mean, a little bit of hyperbole or whatever, just to sort of hook you in, and then let's talk really about writing a novel. Of course, as the thing progresses, we can see pretty easy that it is absolutely, of course, nothing that had never been invented before. It's just a dumbing down of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. Which, I mean, I know for sure that I'm not the first person to point that one out. We'll get to that later. Because a lot of people right now are saying, like, well, yeah, right, the hero's journey, which is like the sort of robust, big way to write a story, the way that everyone's always been writing a story through all of human history, so we are told. Then this is still in the introduction, I think, and I'm reading this right, so that I'm getting the quotes right. The truth is, in today's media-centric, fast-paced, technologically enhanced climate, we novelists are actually competing with screenwriters. Well, that's simply not true. There's no truth to that at all. In fact, Hollywood continues to go to novels and short stories for material for movies. Like, do I have to actually list all those out? I know that I don't. Here's a couple: Annihilation and Arrival, both of which start with an A and were based on one a novel and the other a short story. Of course, there's room for both novels and movies. I read novels all the live long day. I watch movies maybe too much, right? I'm trying to kind of limit my TV consumption and read more. But they exist together, and they always have existed together. And they have been coexisting, by the way, for a little bit more than 100 years. So are novelists in competition with each other? Certainly not with screenwriters. Are novelists in competition with video games? That battle has been lost on the young male side of the equation anyway. Or is there room for everything? Novelists aren't even in competition with each other. Just that whole thing. It's just an incorrect assertion, right? It's just, okay, as we all know this. Well, we don't all know that. That's not actually true, okay? And I really am disinclined to accuse anyone of lying. I'm not saying that, oh, this is all just some kind of put on or anything like that. Honestly, through the entire book, and I read the entire book, I really got the feeling that Jessica Brody is a true believer, right? That she really feels that Blake Snyder has cracked the code, has figured out the new, less complicated version of the monomyth. And honestly, to me, that's kind of more troubling than if this was all just kind of some sort of a big scam, right? Like, if the book was, Blake Snyder has figured out the code, and if you give us $4,000 for this seminar, 2-day seminar, we'll tell you what it is. All alarm bells go up on that one, right? But that's not what they're doing. I mean, the book stands on its own. If there are whatever other things going on out there, I got other things going on out there too, right? Okay, but it in no way feels like some sort of a scam. And this is not me accusing them of doing anything like that, right? If you see cuts in here, it's me because I'm looking at my notes and I'm just trying not to rant and rave. I think we're still in the introduction here. The word plot on its own is pretty useless. It's just a series of events that happen in a story, but structure is the order in which those events happen, and maybe even more importantly, the timing of when they happen. Then you add in a character who needs to change and does change by the end, and presto, you've got a story worth telling. Plot, structure, and character transformation, or what I like to call the holy trinity of story. So why does that make me cringe so much? When at its heart, it's kind of true, no? Is it? Okay, here's what's missing. Here we have a hero who has to change by the end, but no villain at all. Right? We have a protagonist who carries apparently the entire thing, and no antagonist. In the past, I've said, and I stand behind this, the only story structure you really need is the villain starts the story and the hero ends it. Here we have just a hero who is starting somewhere, has to end up somewhere else. Thankfully, that's left open-ended for the most part. And then there's a rigid structure to it. He goes to this, and then he goes to that, and then he goes to this, and he goes to that. He, she, whatever. And then voila, the transformation. Presto, the transformation. So the secret code just ignores the antagonist right up front, right? It also assumes, right, that, or just states outright that the character, the hero, the only character of apparently any value has to be undergoing some kind of change, which is the old saw of the character arc. Another sort of belief system around writing that is in reality not required. There's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, there's a lot of stories that are great that are about, sort of reluctant hero kind of dragged into something and then becomes really, takes on that role or whatever. Somebody who seems like kind of a bad guy who then sees the light. So obviously change in significant characters, whether that's the hero or the villain, the protagonist, the antagonist, whatever word you want to attach to that, anti-heroes and so on. Terrific, right? Is that absolutely necessary? Is that literally the only way in which to approach any novel? It's about a character going step by step through a templated thing and then getting to the change point. Nope. Just no. Look for links down in the description, and this time please actually go to those. Because there's really, I think there's important context in some of these, right? In one case, for instance, I'm talking about character arcs. I really hope you'll read that, especially if you're really a devotee of Save the Cat. It's just not this, sort of character arc idea or the changing hero is not quite as essential as Snyder and Brody present it to be, right? I was interested to see, too, that right up front, and again, we haven't gotten to chapter 1 yet, we get this. Formula. Many novelists worry that following a methodology like Save the Cat will cause their novel to end up formulaic or predictable. They worry that following a structure guide or template will detract from their art and limit their creative options. So I want to nip that fear in the bud right here, right now. The pattern that Blake Snyder found in almost all movies and the pattern that I've similarly found in almost all novels is not a formula. Like I said before, it's an underlying storytelling code. It's the secret recipe that makes great stories. So this is actually where I started to really hold out hope for the book in terms of again, reminding myself, don't be the judgmental guy, right? Go in and actually see what's real about this. I've talked about the difference between formula and recipe myself, right? I've taught an in-person and online course in Pulp Fiction based on the Lester Dent Pulp Paper Master Fiction plot, which was a recipe formula for a 6,000 word pulp detective story that I just think has some great advice inside it. And then, of course, it was about taking his terminology. There's a murder method that the villain has and so on. And words like that, hero, villain, etc. And blowing up those definitions, right? So you're not literally following his 6,000 word template or a template for a 6,000 word detective story. You can turn that into whatever genre you want just by kind of, defining those terms in any way you wish, right? So I thought that was great, right? And so now I'm thinking, okay, they're trying to say, hey, this book has value, keep reading. Well, all the secret codes and stuff. And so right now they're saying, right, they're giving me that hope that the beat sheet and other stuff is more of a, hey, generally, right, maybe think about doing this, right? Kind of set of reminders that might nudge you a little bit and say, hey, don't forget to make this hard, make your character earn that or whatever. So that's great. That's something of value. Yes. The language around it still was troubling to me, right? The secret recipe, the underlying storytelling code, and this assertion that is, again, just simply incorrect, that most movies and novels adhere to it. That being the case, it is sort of strange that no one's found that code yet before. I mean, I don't want to be like all that, but Blake Snyder is the guy who came up with that. I don't know. Maybe, right? I don't know. Anyway, from there, though, it started to get weird. And again, we're still in the introduction. So, and when I say they, like when I talk about they in this, I mean both Blake Snyder and Jessica Brody. Because it really is Jessica Brody following on what Blake Snyder wrote and refers back to him throughout the whole thing. But then they co-opt the word genre for their own purposes, which is, I mean, at the very least, it's just unnecessarily confusing. These are not your mother's genres, sci-fi, drama, comedy, and so on. Instead, the Save the Cat story genres are broken down by type of character transformation and or central theme. This will help you further develop your novel and make sure your story contains the necessary genre ingredients to make it successful. So if they're not genres, why use that word? It just makes no sense. Okay, let's get to that later, but when we talk about really what they are actually talking about. So that was pretty much just the introduction, and I'm holding out hope though, right? I'm thinking they were talking about the difference between formula and recipe, right? A formula is you rigidly have to add exactly this many teaspoons of that, or the bread won't actually rise, and so on. As opposed to a recipe where you're like, use whatever different kind of vegetables you like, and then you can, right? Where it's way more open. Yeah. Okay, so then we get to chapter 1, where, again, right, looking for the positive, I think this is true. I don't think it's a secret, but here's a little secret. Readers don't like reading about perfect heroes who have all their SH*T together. Perfect heroes without any flaws or problems whatsoever are boring, not to mention completely unrealistic. I, for one, have yet to meet a human being whose life is entirely flawless. So if you want to create a hero for your novel who is believable, relatable, and interesting, they can't be perfect. They must have at least one major problem, or better yet, lots of them. Okay, right? Okay, yes. So far, so good. I'm with them on this. It is just not bad advice at all. In fact, that's advice that I've given, like, over and over again, right? On Fantasy Author's Handbook and the books that I've written, classes that I've taught, to authors that I work with. And that brings us to a great tip for writing flawed heroes. Don't let the problem stay contained to just one area of your hero's life. Let the problems manifest and spread and infect. Your hero's problems should be affecting their entire world, their work, their home life, and their relationships. When someone starts reading your novel, they should be thinking something along the lines of, whoa, what a mess this person's life is. That's how you know you've done your job. I realize this seems like a horrible thing to do to your hero, riddle their life with all sorts of difficulties right from the get-go. But it's also an essential thing to do to your hero, because if your hero's life isn't flawed, what's the point of the novel? Why do we care? We turn to story to watch characters fix their problems, better their lives, improve upon their flaws. Great novels take deeply imperfect characters and make them a little less imperfect. I'm not against that. I'm not against that at all, right? On the other hand, I'm sure we can all immediately think of at least a few novels where those characters don't get better. Characters actually just are miserable throughout the whole thing, and then it ends horribly tragically. I don't think Save the Cat is really thinking about the horror genre. Okay? But yet, I do think that that's good advice. If it's just, guy starts out perfect, is perfect throughout the whole thing, just, oh, that's a problem, another problem, nope, knocking it down, I already know, no problem, no big deal. Yep, that's pretty much it. That's not interesting. It's true, right? So again, in sight here, this is good advice. And so here we are in chapter 1, and I'm kind of like, yay. I mean, it's not, I'm not there 100%, but I don't need to be 100% with anybody, right? I don't need anybody to be 100% with me. So after that first introduction that was kind of troubling, chapter 1, I'm kind of like, no, okay, all right, okay, yeah. And the positive continued, right, in chapter 2, where they sort of talk about the universal lessons, right? I agree that all books are about something, for sure, right? And find a link in the description to a post entitled, It Is to Be a Blog About Starting with a Theme, where I get into that in more detail with the help of author Frank Herbert. I didn't talk to him in some kind of seance. He wrote something. Anyway, you'll see. Actually read that, please. Still, though, right, they are perpetuating the myth of the character arc, right? The necessity for change. And more than that, right? Specifically, the necessity for positive change. It's good, but it's not singularly necessary. So again, I'm with you this much. I'm not with you to readers only respond to this one character arc, right? Just not true. Anyway, then we get to chapter 2 where they reveal what I honestly hoped would be a value. I really did. Again, this is the thing that I had seen out of context before, and you don't make judgments from out of context stuff on the internet. But I think it's maybe the most dangerous part of the book. Is that too strong a word? I don't know. Please believe me that I don't use that word. I don't use dangerous lightly. I don't, right? I'm still working through whether or not I think that that's the right way to describe this. But this is where we get to the beat sheet, which is indeed the formula, right? Plain and simple it is. The fact that percentages of the text are attached to this makes that even more egregious. That turns this into a formula, right? It says you need exactly a tablespoonful of, baking soda, no more and no less, or the muffins are going to turn into just blobs of whatever, right? I'm going to run through these real quick. There's 15 of them. Opening image, 0 to 1%. Theme stated, 5%. Setup, 1% to 10%. It's kind of a big range. Catalyst, 10%. So at the 10% point, right, if you're writing a 90,000 word novel, I guess, right, you get to 9,000 words and a catalyst happens. Debate, 10% to 20%. Break into two, 20%. B story, 22%. Fun and games, 20% to 50%, so apparently there's some overlap. Midpoint, 50%. Bad guys close in, 50% to 75%. Ooh, we're mentioning bad guys all of a sudden. All is lost, 75%. Dark Night of the Soul, 75% to 80%. Break into three, 80%. Finale, 80% to 99%. And final image, 99% to 100%. Okay. I need to pause, to breathe here. I don't know, man. I struggle to understand why this keeps being perpetuated. Because, I mean, there's just no other way to describe this except as a dumbed down version of the already totally debunked hero's journey. Okay? And you know what I'm talking about, right? This Joseph Campbell, the 12 stages of the hero's journey, right? Somehow Save the Cat adds a couple. I'm not going to compare these head to head. Is there any purpose to that, right? Where the hero's journey is the ordinary world, the call to adventure, refusal of the call, meeting with the mentor, crossing the threshold, tests allies and enemies, approach the ordeal, the reward, the road back, the resurrection, and return with the elixir. All right, so that said, then, there's nothing original about the secret code that Blake Snyder cracked. He didn't crack it. He read the hero's journey or, some version of that or saw that somewhere. And if he was a screenwriter, that's been being pounded into screenwriters. It's a whole other thing that I'm just not going to get into for way too long. So again, it's the same nonsense monomyth, right? With slightly less challenging terminology. And so then as she explains these beats, right, at least she does, okay, right? And again, I'm trying to be fair. I'm trying to find outs, right, for this. She does warn against info dumps, right, which is good. Don't info dump. And encourages authors to keep their characters active. That's good, right? So there's good advice sprinkled throughout. This is not all just like, from beginning to end, it's terrible and it's going to hurt you. But under that, right, and just there, behind just the tiniest little bits of, well, you might maybe kind of tweak it a little bit, it really is presented as the one true path, right? And the idea that this is the one true path, or that there is a one true path at all, okay, it's just absurd. It's an absurdity. Honestly, I could write a much more interesting novel taking their beat sheet and reversing it. Starting at her ending and then pulling a character backward through the whole thing. I mean, there's a challenge for you right there, right? You're looking for a writing prompt, write the reverse of Save the Cat. And in any case, most stories are better started well after the character setup stuff, somewhere more like her step 10. So she does say that some of the, and this is a quote, some of the beats get a little jumbled up when she tries to apply the formula to existing books, which are obviously really super cherry-picked, where, she can use them as examples of, see, look, this is how, and some of the books that she chooses are just like, right? Like, are we supposed to be sold on this because she can force the Da Vinci Code into this? I mean, the Da Vinci Code was a massive bestseller because certain elements of the Catholic Church told people not to read it. And just in general, right? If you're at the stage where you're marketing, if you can get the Catholic Church to tell people not to read it, bonanza. Bonanza. Surefire bestseller. Right? And that really was exactly what the Da Vinci Code was. I read the Da Vinci Code. I read it all the way through, and I was flummoxed by how anybody got all the way through that book. Effectively, completely devoid of conflict. But this is the new monomyth. This is the example, the shining example of what every single novel actually is, should be, and whether you like it or not, will be. I mean, it's like, I hope you can see the fear in my. So some of the beats get a little jumbled up when she tries to apply those to actual books. That was really Joseph Campbell's methodology too, by the way. he only looked at a small collection of classical Western, really mostly Greek myths, and then authors who came later who were primarily influenced by those, mostly Greek, right, classical Western mythology, and sort of mimicked those, or right, or were again inspired by those very purposely. So they're sort of like, I want this to read like that, right? I want it to be infused with this kind of mythic sensibility, and I'm doing that on purpose. J.R.R. Tolkien, right? Which again, like, got great results. So there, it's something that you can do, but then somehow this mental switch gets flipped and says, because it looks like there was kind of a tradition of storytelling. I mean, what was this, 2,000, 3,000 years ago? And then later on, those were rediscovered, translated. And a lot of people dived onto that and were like, ooh, yeah, like, I want to sort of capture that same feeling. Then that means that's the only story that's ever been told. Right? And this step-by-step progression through that story is the only way to tell a story, and everyone who has ever written a story has always done that. And then ignores the rest of the entire world. Ignores literally a few thousand years of changing and developing cultures, of new political and social ideas. Yeah. Oh, God. Right. I mean, cultures that existed concurrently with Homer, right, who he had no way of knowing even existed at all, had no contact with, certainly wasn't trading stories and ideas with. There's no way in a million years, whatever, there's no way that Homer, right, could have in any way predicted any part of the world that we're living in now in the year 2024. Human culture writ large, right, over centuries of time, over the entire earth, separated, coming together in strange ways, fighting with each other, getting together, combining with each other, whole new cultures and ideas started. No one back then, right, is taking into account anything, right? Really the rise of the sort of modern democracy. No concept of communism or socialism or democratic socialism or fascism. Fascism may have looked actually pretty familiar to, kind of the ancient world. But here we are, right? Once again now, right, in the form of Save the Cat, being told that every single human has only ever told this one story. Boom, 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 boom. For all of the entire history of human culture throughout the entire world. I want someone to tell me why you would ever in a million years believe that. Right? There's this implication that this is the story we all tell. So you can either go ahead and understand that and follow either the beat sheet or the hero's journey, or you're going to end up telling the story anyway, right? Because that's the way the human mind works. That's the way we tell stories. It is the story. This is just, it's simply and monumentally incorrect. It is just not correct. How do I know this? Because I've read more than one book. Now I'm starting to get, okay? It's not true. It's not true. It's never been true. Like, we're going to shake it off. We got to just, let me adjust my, there's George Takei. He knows he knows the score. So, okay, I'm 2 chapters into Save the Cat Writes a Novel. And my efforts to find the positive here are just, at this point now, just destroyed. I got to admit it. I can't. I just can't. I can't. Right? The whole scheme is predicated on just 2 massively incorrect assertions. It's all about the hero's character arc, and there's only one way to structure any and every novel. Just simply not true. Has not ever been true, and it damn well never be true. I think we're gonna dive into chapter 3. Let's go to chapter 3. It does start with some good advice. Okay? This should come as no surprise. If you want to write a good story, you have to know what good stories are made of. Along the same lines, if you want to write a successful novel, you have to read successful novels. You have to study how they work, what makes them successful, why they resonate with so many people. You have to break them open, peek inside, and study their inner mechanics, the way a medical student would study the inner workings of the human body. How do the pieces fit together? Why does this part go there? How are certain stories similar and how are they different? Stories are different? In short, the first step to being a successful writer is being a reader. Absolutely true. Okay? I've said this before, I'll say it again. Everybody said it before. If you read On Writing by Stephen King, it's all he talks about pretty much. It's just read, read, read. Carry a book around with you. Always be reading, read, and read, and read, and read. Right? The first and best writing class, absolutely, is other people's published novels. I will argue with you about if you want to write a successful novel, you have to read successful novels and then figure out why those novels were successful. We just talked about the Da Vinci Code was successful because someone in the Catholic Church said don't read it. Is that something that you're going to read the Da Vinci Code in the hopes that you're going to have that bit of marketing grace bestowed upon you? Right? You can dissect Harry Potter all you want to, but your book is not going to come out right at that moment when kids were on the internet all of a sudden. So some of this, right, where the period goes, where the comma goes, how, sort of what's happening at the beginning of a chapter, how a chapter ends on some kind of like dramatic pause point or something like that. Absolutely, you're going to get that out of reading novels, right? And I've always said, like, read older novels for just the sense of storytelling, but read the newest you can in terms of what the writing looks like, where you will see that, just clouds of omniscient POV is just not there anymore, right? So there you're kind of you're looking for trends in writing, you're looking for what other people are doing and so on. So yes, read, right? But read something to try to figure out the sauce of how to make this successful? Nope. Because everything about any best-selling novel is a series of irreproducible events. It's timing, it's trends, it's all that stuff. And then we get to this one. There's just one teensy problem. There are quite a few novels out there, like tens of millions of them. There's no possible way to read them all. But here's the good news. You don't have to. What if we could sort every great novel ever written into one of 10 categories and study the categories instead? What if we could group similar stories together into story types, figure out what elements each type has in common, and then design a template to follow when you're writing your own novel within that same category? You've probably guessed what I'm going to say next. We can. Actually, we already have. They're called the Save the Cat story genres. Like, what are they talking about? I mean, what massive arrogance to think that you can do that, right? Or that you should even try. I mean, in that quote, it said, there's like tens of millions of novels out there. There's no way to read them all. And yet somehow, Jessica Brody has distilled every one of those tens of millions of novels down to 10 stories, which he then deliberately misunderstands the word genre to somehow categorize those. But that's okay because this is based off Blake Snyder having seen every single movie and doing the same thing. It would be easier to watch every single movie. So having said there's no way to do that, we're then told that we've done that, and we found the common elements that connect every single movie, every single book across centuries, longer. I mean, obviously less time for movies. So, and then what follows from that is this willful and pointless misunderstanding of the word genre. It's just this futile effort to back up the senseless assertion that there are only 10 stories. Just, I don't know how to say it's just not true. Nobody who actually knows anything about storytelling or the history of world literature will ever say that there's only 10 stories. So whatever promises, right, whatever sort of like, here's a story structure you can play with, which I think is great, right? And if you only just kind of go out on the internet and find the beat sheet and then just sort of go like, well, how can I fiddle with this and move this around? Ignore all the percentages because that's obviously like, the hell are you talking about, right? Then great, right? You play any, I've said this in, an early video about what to do with all this writing advice. Play with it, try it, right? Just mess with it. Make it your own, right? So great. All right. Anyway, what the hell? Let's we come this far. I didn't want this to be like a 2-hour freaking thing. Let's look at their list of 10 stories. All of the stories, the only 10 stories that all humans have ever told for all of human history. Why done it? Rites of passage, institutionalized, superhero, dude with a problem, fool triumphant, buddy love, out of the bottle, golden fleece, and monster in the house. I don't know. I mean, was Clarice Lispector at any point in her life writing a dude with a problem story? I don't know. This is the history and the present day of literature needlessly infantilized. And that's really what's happening here, right? This attitude really suffuses the entire book. And you've probably picked up on it on some of these extracts, right, that I pulled out here. It's demeaning to, honestly, everyone across the board. Just the attitude that pours out of this thing. Like, hey kids, I'm here to rescue you with the secret code that everyone but this other guy and me were too dumb to have spotted. Though clearly you'll see when I make a list of goofball terms that this is clearly true. Here, authors who are coming to this for help, and I know what that's like, right? To not know, to just really have this burning desire to do it and just, you're trying to figure out how. These are real human people that I work with all the time. I was that real human person. I still am, right? Trying to figure it out. No one through this whole process is treated like an adult, let alone an artist, right, with something to say, or the individual agency, any individual agency in how to say it, right? I mean, at some point I gotta just Because we get then somewhere in here treated to pearls like original is not an achievable goal in novel writing. All right. I mean, fuck you. I don't care about whatever YouTube's rules about swearing, pardon my French, I'm sorry, but fuck you and the ass you wrote in on. This now you fucking pissed me off. I have more notes. I read the whole book. I didn't stop there. I should have. I mean, and there was a part of me who wanted to just like, oh, I should have bought this so I could light it on fire. So, but at this point in the book, right, we now have 3 basic assertions that inform all of the Save the Cat universe. 1, it's all about the hero's character arc. 2, there's only one way to structure any and every novel. And 3, there's no point in even trying to be original. Not one single part of any of those 3 assertions is correct. It's not correct. They're wrong. They're just wrong. In every underlying principle of the book. Please hear me about that. It's just not true what they're saying. And look, everybody, I don't know, maybe I'm the millionth person to say this, and everybody's like, oh, do we really need to beat up on Save the Cat again? We know. I don't know. I hope so. Right? I hope that you've just passed by this video and said, yeah, I get it. Go ahead and comment here. Please comment here, right? Tell me how much this book has helped you. If it's helped you, I don't know. I mean, I read reviews on Goodreads and stuff, and it's like, I have that book sitting next to me whenever I write. I can't write without it. And I'm like really worried. I'm really worried about that. Do you see this as a good thing, right? Is it freeing to hear that you are never going to be original and there's no such thing as originality, so just blow that off and template your way through a thing? It's just bad information, right? And obviously, no book should ever be banned, ever, ever, ever. I don't care what the book is. Yeah. And I have no gate to keep, right? I have no power to do anything about this at all, except to say, hey, man, I read this. I've lived a life inside of writing novels. And I know this to be untrue. Right? If you find some use in it, though, right, like I said, if you go, okay, yeah, this is not, it's goofy, right? But, right, I can take this beat sheet and I can move it around and I can play with it and I can say, like, well, yeah, I mean, let's talk about, like, is this a why done it, right? And again, these are sort of looking at kind of story, what I hate using the word tropes, but that's basically what they are. And then, okay, can we combine those and play with that? Great, right? Yeah, I mean, use this in whatever way you want. So, in the comments, right, could you find use in it that way, the same way that I found use in Lester Dent's formula in the same way, right, by just taking a word from that and blowing up the definition of it till it changes the whole idea, but there's still reminders about kind of, moving a character through a story and making them earn things and raising the stakes and that kind of stuff, which is all important stuff to know and to think about. So, I don't know, read it, right? Use it however you want to, but, oh man, I don't know, I read a lot of books that I don't like. I DNF stuff all the time. And they just sort of disappear. I just sort of delete them from Goodreads and I move on with my life. And I want to make a promise to everybody that this is the last bad review video, negative video that you're going to see here. There was one recently on the blog, right? And it's always about the same thing, right? It's anyone who tells you, this is the one way to do it. That's the only way to do it. And if you don't do it that way, then you suck, you're not a writer. it's over for you. Just you're, I don't know what you are. That other book where the guy called Stephen King and Jean-Paul Sartre, non-artists, and just a complete dismissal of genre. It's just like, no, right? So are there things in here that you can play with and find and make work? I would think so, sure. Right? Just like I said, there's some actual, there's some good advice in there too. But the way it's presented as this is verbatim the one way to do it, it's like some kind of step-by-step guide into turning you into some sort of human chat GPT thing. Just burping out the intentionally uncreative, unoriginal story over and over again, absent the human trait of creative discovery. I know, wouldn't that just be the saddest way to conduct a writing career or just a life? Being told, don't try to be original, just follow this lockstep. Oh, God. I'm not doing one of these again. I have to admit, though, I feel cleansed. I feel like I've gotten that off my chest. I will see you again with writing advice that is tempered with, hey, you write your story. That's what I want to read. I've written my stories. I know how those are going to play out. I know how that's going to end, right? I want to read my story over and over again. I don't want to read the story, right? Write your story. That's what I'm looking for. And that's what every single other reader is looking for. And yeah, man, that's what every agent is looking for, believe it or not. That's what every publisher is looking for. Every movie studio, I don't know. I can't speak to that. Don't save the cat. Thanks, everybody. Like, subscribe. It's all free. There's no hidden club. There's no Patreon. There's no money at the end of this for me. Share. I don't know, man. I'll see you again soon. Oh. If I hold my hands like this, the bags under my eyes go away. Look how youthful he is. He must be 22 years old.